Hello, you're looking at this because you want to know why you can't get an appointment with your GP. And I'm sat here New Year's Eve, manning the reception. Everybody's gone home, and I thought I'd spend the time pass the time by making a little video, just giving you my ideas as a GP of 31 years on why we are where we are right now. And that is primary care is just not delivering the appointments that people need or want, with the result that there's increased demand in secondary care, and we're into a vicious circle. Obviously this is my opinion, and yeah, others will consider it invalid and not based on any evidence, and that might be true. However, here goes. Well, it's a supply and demand issue, and there's a problem with an imbalance between supply and demand. Straightforward. First off, demand. Elderly population, it's well recognised, increased morbidity or illness in the profession, in the population, requiring more medical input. Medicines become far more complex, and, which is a good thing. We do far more preventative care than we used to, which is a good thing. But it comes with workload. Also, secondary care isn't doing what they used to do 31 years ago. For instance, people with chronic diseases like hypertension and diabetes have been managed in a hospital clinic. Now they're managed by general practitioners, which is a good thing. But there's a workload impact. Medicine's far more complex than what it was 31 years ago. To give you an idea, when I started in St Anne's, we had 2 cardiologists. We now have 21. Far more aggressive in the management of heart disease, far more intensive, far more effective management of heart disease. And that's mirrored across other conditions. So that's why demand's gone up. Secondary care does tend to put upon general practice and primary care at times. They probably don't realise what they're doing. They'll send out a letter saying, please titrate this gentleman's medication up to the maximum. With each step is fraught with danger. They're very brave when they're not the ones signing the prescription. And there's a massive amount of workload to follow the instructions that they, which, you know, usually evidence-based by good quality research, but it's still very difficult to actually put into practice. Just now I've had a phone call from a patient who's been to a clinic in the local hospital and been told that he needs a blood test urgently. So it's New Year's Eve. You need a blood test urgently this evening, and he's in a clinic in Blackpool Victoria Hospital, and obviously we're not running a surgery this evening, and besides he's had the blood test done just like 4 weeks before, so it's nonsense. You know, you could go down to the path lab and the person who wants the test would get the result directly. You know, we do try and feed that back, and people do take it on board, but there's a way to go. So that's demand. Then supply. Now this is a bit more tricky, and we're in a position where the morale amongst general practitioners is pretty low, and that means that people resent the work, and when they resent the work they try and avoid the work, and the more they try and avoid the work and fail, the more they resent it, and you're in a vicious circle. Again, this is my view. And actually being a GP is a fantastic job. It is absolutely brilliant. I mean, there's laughter, there's tears, there's highs, there's lows, there's joy, there's despair. I mean, you just never know what's coming through your door. The whole world of medicine, from unborn babies to centurions, and it's a brilliant career for anybody, and I would highly recommend it. But you've got to embrace the work, and some of it is trivial, and some of it is, could be done. And they say, oh, it could be done by the pharmacist. Well, that is right, but you don't know that until you've seen them. And sometimes people come with a trivial problem, and a chance remark, a chance observation, and all of a sudden you've got something really serious. Case I remember, somebody with an ingrowing toenail had a mole on the top of the foot, and I said, oh, keep an eye on that mole, report if it, tell me if it changes. And he said, well, what about this one? He opened his shirt, and there was this huge melanoma on his chest. That guy's life was saved by a plastic surgeon. Young man. So there it is, ingrowing toenail, would have been triaged to, I don't know, anybody these days. And that's primary care. That is general practice. A friend of mine went to the doctors with flu, and a very talented GP diagnosed that he got a very serious infection in his heart. He spent 3 months in a cardiac unit, who saved his life, and that GP did an amazing job. And flu nowadays, oh, you don't have antibiotics, go to the pharmacist. He would have been dead. So we're at the situation where people are trying to avoid work, and this develops into coping strategies. Like they'll, and this is a bit controversial, but this is from my own evidence and things that I've seen and heard. You'll get people who'll do a surgery and then they'll nip out the fire escape, so that they can't be given any extra work. You'll get doctors who'll work glacially slowly, so that if there's any extra work, somebody else has to do it because they're still getting through their day-to-day their pre-booked surgery. You'll get people who are angry, or so nobody wants to talk to them. The staff won't want to go near them if they can avoid it. You'll get people who are rude. You'll get people who sadly become ill, and genuinely so, and there's no real incentive to come back to work when it was work that made you ill in the first place, especially if it's a psychological problem. There was even, I've heard of one person who had numerous children, so they're always on maternity leave. Then you'll get other people who'll go off and do administrative work, working within the combined commissioning groups. They can earn a lot of money, but they're taken off the front line. Doctors will do, say, 9 sessions, but 7 of them will be surgeries, and then they'll have a session of paperwork, a session of continuing medical education. Well, when we started, we did all of that. It was outside the surgeries, did the surgeries, then you did your paperwork. When people are on holiday, their surgeries aren't covered, so the practice, if you get a 6-man practice with 6 weeks holiday each, you've got 36 weeks of the year, when you're less than a full complement of doctors and appointments. So all these things contribute to a decrease in the supply of appointments. And then you get the situation where people say, well, you can only book 2 days in advance. And if you need an appointment, oh, they're all gone, you've got to ring up again tomorrow, and again tomorrow, or you have to come and queue at 8 o'clock. And you get old people, old, ill people, queuing up in the dark and the cold, especially this time of year, trying to get an appointment with their GP. That's just intolerable. It's completely wrong. It should not be allowed. It should not be happening. You should be able to book an appointment anytime in advance. A day, a week, a month, a year. Book an appointment. It should be freely available, in my opinion. So, what's the solution? Well, we're moving into these ever bigger practices, and it will just become so impersonal. It's not going to help with the job satisfaction. It's going to make it worse, and people are just going to do whatever they have to do to get the person out the patient out the consulting room and onto the next person, in my opinion. And all that's going to happen is people will go up to A&E and wait to be seen by a doctor, or they go to a walk-in centre. Meanwhile, the GPs are still getting paid for looking after them, so they're making all the money but not doing any of the work. I mean, and if they're paying nurse practitioners or healthcare assistants or paramedics, they're not on the same income as a GP partner, so they make more money. So how can that be right? You provide a worse service and actually make more money. Meanwhile, someone else is doing the work. It doesn't make any sense to me. And in my view, I can understand why we're moving from our cottage industry of small little units all working together, so working independently, to a more of a coordinated network of practices working in a similar way. I can understand why the Department of Health would find that far more acceptable and more controllable, and you can standardise quality, and if there's problems, you can have managers who can work on it, and that all makes a lot of sense. But you've got to be able to maintain the continuity of care where one doctor sees one patient. That tends to maintain that relationship, to develop the relationship between the patient and the doctor, but also, more importantly in my view, the relationship between the doctor and the patient, so that you care what happens to that person. So you're always, if they're not well, you're thinking about it. Your mind's working on it. What else could it be? Where are we going wrong? It's quiet times. You come to say, I wonder if it's this. I wonder if it's that. And this is where the job satisfaction comes from. If you actually hit on what is going on, what is the problem. And that's what we're going to lose if we move to these mega health centres. I call them Docgozillas, these overgrown rubber monsters stomping around. Now, my view of a way forward to have the benefits of the networked or federation of practices working more as one, plus maintaining the continuity of care and the key relationship between the doctor and the patient and the doctor, which gives you the job satisfaction and the continuity of care, is that we should have personal lists. So each doctor has a list of people who sees that doctor. Now, it's not a completely left field idea. There's lots of places already run like this. There are problems, there are issues, but they're not insurmountable, and I think it's definitely the way the profession should be looking to go. Part-time workers could have a small list, and people registered with them would know that maybe they're not available for appointments Thursdays and Fridays, but if you can see them at short notice, it doesn't really matter. You're waiting weeks to see a doctor now. What's 3 or 4 days in the week? Or you could job or share a list. There are ways and means that this could work, and if you can see your GP and you have continuity of care, it's actually a benefit to the taxpayer, because they don't end up going to secondary care, and secondary care starts doing investigations that cost a fortune, of course, find problems they weren't even looking for, and you end up with very expensive investigations and treatments, and all of which don't really get to the bottom of the problem that the person went with in the first place. And when you're getting people looking at patients who are less qualified than doctors, you're going to get diagnoses made that are maybe not quite as accurate. I don't know, they could be very good. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to do the job, but you do need some experience. I mean, it's not for nothing that we spend 9 years training to be a GP, and you can't do this even coming from a nursing background. I mean, that's a generalisation. There are some nurses who should really have been on doctor's courses, to be honest, and it's great that that has been expanded now. Anyway, going back, I feel, in summary, that the problem is that we've got a disparity between supply and demand, and that needs to be addressed by improving morale in the profession, which comes from continuity care and the key doctor to patient relationship. And on that note, I wish you all a happy new year, and I hope you have a healthy new year.